This is the dark story of the deadliest and most controversial airplane in human history. No aircraft before or since has achieved what the B-29 Superfortress did. In this video, you'll see its beginnings, its terrifying missions, and the reason it will be remembered forever. In the years leading up to the Second World War, America's main strategic bomber was the B-17 Flying Fortress. Introduced in 1938, it was a solid aircraft that later took on risky bombing missions in Europe. However, with the expected widespread conflict, the United States urgently needed an aircraft with a longer range and the capacity to carry a devastating bomb payload. The B-17 Flying Fortress lacked the range and power to carry a full payload across the vast Pacific or Atlantic Oceans. Additionally, the new bomber needed a pressurized cabin with doors that could open during flight for bomb releases, which was a significant engineering challenge. As the Second World War progressed, the need for such an aircraft became more and more apparent. Several prototypes were developed under extreme time pressure, with some test flights ending in horrible tragedy. During one fully manned test flight, the prototype's engine and fuel tank caught fire shortly after takeoff, resulting in a horrific crash and the deaths of all 11 crew members and 21 civilians on the ground. After numerous mechanical failures and setbacks, around 100 B-29s were scrambled, but only 15 were actually operational. By 1944, these problems were resolved, and mass production was in full swing. The B-29 was designed to fly faster and higher than any bomber before it. Initially, there were questions about how exactly the B-29 would be used. Although it was created to fulfill the need for a long-range bomber in the Pacific, it was first intended for operations against Germany. However, there were no airfields in the United Kingdom large enough to accommodate a group of planes as large as the B-29s, but it soon became clear that Japan and the Pacific theater were more urgent targets. The fully equipped B-29 had a range of approximately 5,200 miles, but the Americans did not yet have a foothold in Asia to support supply drops to their planes in China. Instead, the Superfortresses were based in British North India, where they had a steady supply of fuel and ammunition. In preparation for raids, the fleet carried supplies over the Himalayas to bases in southwest China, from which they would launch their bombing runs. This was a logistical nightmare. First, the targets bombed from China were so far that the bombers barely had enough fuel for the journey to the target and back. To effectively bomb the entire country, the Americans needed runways much closer to Japan, so they moved into the Marianas Islands, a remote archipelago located about 1,500 miles south of Tokyo. In bloody battles, US forces took control of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in the summer of 1944 and quickly built 5 large air bases there. With this move, Japan's population and industrial centers were now well within the range of a fully armed B-29. The B-29 introduced a new and innovative crew setup. 6 crew members were positioned in the forward pressurized compartment, and a pressurized tunnel behind the cockpit provided access to the rear pressurized compartment. This rear compartment housed the B-29's computerized fire control system. Traditional manned turrets were not suitable for the high-altitude missions of the B-29, so a remote control system was developed. The aircraft had 4 turrets with double 50 caliber machine guns, 2 on top of the fuselage and 2 underneath, which were controlled from sighting stations within the pressurized compartments. Positioned on an elevated seat nicknamed the barber's chair, the central fire control gunner could take control of any of the gun positions remotely. The B-29 was also the first bomber to use radar as standard equipment. But the real power of the B-29 was in its bomb load, up to 20,000 pounds housed in 2 bomb bays. To maintain stability, the bombs would be released alternately between the 2 bomb bays. To lift such a heavy aircraft, Boeing equipped the B-29 with 4 supercharged engines, each producing 2,300 horsepower. These were the most powerful piston engines in production at the time, but they were infamous for overheating and catching fire, often with catastrophic results. The Superfortress saw its first combat mission in June of 1944. Around 75 planes participated in a bombing run over Japanese-occupied Bangkok. Just 10 days later, 68 B-29s embarked on a mission to destroy the imperial factories in Yawata, Japan, but the operation went horribly wrong. One B-29 was shot down by anti-aircraft fire and 2 others were forced to crash land. Out of the 68 bombers, only 1 managed to hit its intended target. In these early missions, the B-29 proved to be an incredibly inaccurate bomber. At first, the United States Army Air Force attempted to use the same so-called strategic bombing tactics they had used on the Western Front. From high altitudes, bombs were dropped on critical locations in cities like factories, bridges, and water supplies. In theory, this approach was intended to minimize civilian casualties. However, despite careful calculations, the B-29 consistently landed bombs miles away from its targets. After months of failure and extensive research, the Americans finally discovered the cause. At about 6 miles above Japan, the same altitude from which the B-29s were bombing, winds regularly reached speeds of 250 miles per hour. This multi-directional jet stream made strategic bombing impossible. For the B-29 to effectively force Japan into submission, significant changes in tactics were necessary. Because of this, the Army Air Force made crucial changes that would completely alter the B-29's performance. This was when the American Major General Curtis LeMay stepped in. LeMay introduced a shift from high-altitude strategic bombing to low-altitude firebombing. The incendiary raids began with the bombing of Kobe City on February 4, 1945. It quickly became clear that this new method would cause devastation unlike anything seen before. In fact, the firebombing of Tokyo on March 9th and 10th remains the deadliest bombing attack in human history, with an estimated 100,000 casualties in just 24 hours. Most Japanese houses were built from wood and bamboo, and the resulting firestorm was utterly devastating. However, the firebombing of Tokyo would never be as infamous as the B-29's final and most significant act of World War II, dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When the atomic bombs were ready, the Thin Man, which was long and tubular, and the Fat Man, which was round and ovular, the only aircraft capable of carrying and delivering these massive bombs was the B-29. However, this mission required additional modifications, leading to the creation of specialized B-29s known as silver plates. These modified aircraft were stripped of typical armaments to reduce weight. They also included a specialized weaponer section in the cockpit with tools for monitoring the bomb's condition before release. On August 6, 1945, a silver plate B-29 called the Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Bockscar dropped the Fat Man on Nagasaki. Less than a week later, the war with Japan was over. Through months of relentless bombing of the Japanese mainland, the B-29 had effectively brought an end to the conflict. After the war, the B-29 set records for the longest, non-stop flight that still stand today. The Superfortress's production was officially halted in 1946, but this was not the end of the B-29 story. The Superfortress played a small role in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, though it soon became clear that the bomber was less suited for this type of warfare. The North Koreans had few clear targets suitable for strategic or firebombing, and the introduction of the Soviet MiG-15 provided a powerful interceptor against the B-29. Despite these challenges, B-29s flew 20,000 sorties and dropped 200,000 tons of bombs during the Korean War, primarily flying at night to avoid interception. After the Korean War, the B-29 gradually became obsolete. Overall, the B-29 was a tremendous success and played a significant role in the American victory over Japan in the Second World War. However, this achievement came with a cost. The B-29's engines often caught fire, and more B-29s were lost to mechanical failure than to enemy fire. The project was the most expensive of the Second World War, with a total cost of $3 billion, equivalent to $43 billion today. The impact of the B-29 on the bombing of Japan was so significant that even the Soviet Union copied its design. When a few US pilots were unable to return to American bases after bombing raids, they flew north and landed in Siberia. Instead of returning the aircraft to the Americans, the Soviets dismantled it and attempted to reverse engineer it, ultimately producing the Tupolev Tu-4. Today, 22 B-29s are preserved worldwide. Among these are the Bockscar and the Enola Gay, the two planes that dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. Remarkably, two superfortresses are still airworthy today.